Obviously, this has been an interesting transition period time for business in general, and for like the last several years, we've been looking at market trends that are either reacting to some of the changes that businesses are trying to do, or in fact helping drive some of those changes. And I think we're at kind of a nice, interesting point from a business perspective, and maybe we're finally going to start to see the change that I think businesses are dealing with accelerate. So, there's this kind of fundamental shift from a model that was built off of the industrial, hierarchical, structured kind of world that we lived in, and the internet itself opened up a lot of new opportunities, and the technologies that are built on top of that have really created some pretty major pressures on business to do things differently. So if you're a business today, you're dealing with an increasing amount of pressure around a few areas. Customers, and I sort of joke that it's customers who won't behave anymore. They won't do what you want them to do. Maybe they never did, but now it's really obvious that they don't. And internally, employees that are increasingly more difficult to force into some sort of a box, because there are a lot of expectations and a lot of things that they want from their relationship with a company that are not as traditional in a hierarchical organization. And then even partners are struggling with their own business models, and they're trying to become and they need to become much more closely tied with the company, and in fact the whole world sort of becomes an ecosystem around the company, so you're tying partners and customers and partners together. So if you think about that as a backdrop, what are the things that are really interesting and important today? It's around customer experience, it's around employee experience, and it's around partner experience. And how do you create the right sort of environment to take advantage of the opportunity you have, and at the same time diffuse the pressure that you feel because things are changing. And I think it's interesting in a good time, because the pressure is to the point now that a lot of companies are responding and have to respond. At the same time, it's one of those transition periods when some companies aren't responding well, and they are trying to do things the way they've always done them, but faster, and that's not the right answer. It didn't change their business. So now they look at a business that's trying to change. They realize that their sales model isn't really working the way it used to be. They realize that marketing has changed, and you can reach people in a different way, but it's not about outbound anymore. It's about a conversation, or inbound they call it, but it's really about creating a more of a dialogue than it is about blasting away a message. In service, in customer service, employees have to deal with increasing amount of channels and information flow and issues from customers that are really much more aware. They're much better educated because they have more tools to be educated. And the company's dealing with a multi-channel problem. So in other words, they're having communications and interactions with customers on all of the different online channels and their traditional offline channels. And it's what once maybe was email now might be Twitter, might be Facebook, might be. So there's a lot of things from the internal system that is complicated. But then from the outside, the customer really starts to think about it, and they don't have a multi-channel problem. They have an interaction problem, because they just want to contact you in the way they're comfortable with. And if you can't respond to that, then they what do they do? So those kind of things are out there. And let's take an example of the sales problem right now. The sales problem is because the customer has more access to information. They can become educated on their own. They can build a trust base for information from their network instead of trying to go to a company for it. And in a recent survey we did, it was in a B2B, business to business world. The survey showed that 64% of the buyers, so it was a buyer behavior survey, 64% of the buyers said that they'd already made a decision on what they were going to purchase and from whom before they actually contacted the vendor. So you're not selling in that environment anymore because you're not actually interacting with that prospect at a time when it would actually help them make a decision. So you, as a company, you're trying to you're trying to increase your sales efficiency and effectiveness because you're having a harder time getting deals, and the ones you do get, you feel like you don't have as much control over. That's absolutely true. So traditional businesses who aren't yet changing just try to do the same things they've been doing, but they try to do more of them. So, from a salesperson perspective, it's like you're not doing enough cold calls, or you're not doing enough prospecting, or to marketing, you're not generating enough leads. And that's not really the problem. So you can't, it's like if I'm going to visit Chicago and I have to go somewhere specific, but I go there with a map of St. Louis, no matter how quickly I go or how much I move around and how many people I ask to show me on my map, it's just not going to work because you just have the wrong reference. So in that sales world, it's the same thing. I now have to figure out how I move upstream in the interaction so that I can find a prospect that wants to interact with me or that has a need that I could possibly help them with. So the salesperson actually looks more like an educator in that role. They want to collect those opportunities and then do things that would help that customer build trust, or that prospect build trust, and also help you move them along in a way that builds that trust and relationship over time so that they do actually get to a point where they would buy from you. And that's a really different thing than I'm selling. It's more about I'm interacting, and I build trust, and then I get the deal. And that's hard, I think, for a lot of companies. So that's a specific, but it's happening all across the other areas too. Employees, everything from I don't want to use the tools you're giving me anymore because I like the UI that the user interface that I get on my personal web use, social sites and media sites, and now the software you give me looks like looks really old and outdated, and it's not interactive, and it doesn't help me. It doesn't have intelligence built in. I have to fill out all these forms and enter a lot of manual data that I know the system could put in for me. All those things are causing a lot of pressure to change, and some technology vendors, software particularly, is trying to move to places where they can really start to offer a lot of value to a company that's trying to make that transition. You hear about digital transformation, and that's one way to look at it. We sort of look at it as business modernization, because really what you're trying to do, it's not just about the technology, but it's about the culture and about the process and the way you do things and who does them and what the systems can do to help you. So that's a little bit of a different take on it, and across that idea, the business modernization framework, you can work in those different areas to identify what the new way should be, identify the technology that can enable that, and then also identify the culture shifts and the change that need to happen to get that to a point where it will be effective in the environment we're in today.